Welcome back to another episode of LEO Radio, and we continue with our overview of Jocko's book. Joey, why don't you with me today? I might as well introduce everybody. Again, we have Joey Sperlazza, Colin Colleton, and again, my name is Jim Harris, and we are going to continue with the book. Joey, why don't you fill us in on where we're at?
Sure, we're covering Jocko's book, Extreme Ownership. We're in part 2, Laws of Combat, and we're going to discuss Prioritize and Execute, chapter 3. So, opening principles. Even the most competent of leaders can be overwhelmed if they try to tackle multiple problems or a number of tasks simultaneously. The team will likely fail at each of those tasks. Instead, leaders must determine the highest priority task and execute. When overwhelmed, fall back on this principle: prioritize and execute. I'm sure, Jim, you have a ton of experience that would be lined up right with this, especially with having to be a deputy chief of how many officers were in your department? 150?
So yeah, we had 165 officers in our organization. Those are the sworn officers, and then aside we have when you equate with our jail guards, our mechanics, our custodians, our specials, our security force, um, you know, all our dispatchers, records clerks, we had about 400 people total.
How do you prioritize and execute your mission when you have that many people you're supervising?
It really comes down to working together as a team, and it comes down to the leadership within each component. And at every size organization, whether you're a mid-size organization like from my department, or you're larger like Collins and yours, or maybe even um, to the very smallest, if everybody's on the same page with the mission and where we're going, then it makes it easier. But there's challenges. There's challenges because you have different people with different leadership abilities coming in. They Colin, you say it all the time, egos. And you have people coming in with egos, and they don't check them. And instead of providing leadership, they're providing their own ego aspects. So there's a whole host of issues with trying to get one team, one vision, one mission accomplished. And every organization has this issue.
And especially with the training I've been to and actual scenes I've been to, it even leads to how you have to understand what you need to do as a frontline supervisor. Uh, I've been to some crazy fights, and most of them are in the jurisdiction where Colin works. But as you go to these fights and you go to these scenes, and anybody that's gone to any type of riot training, understanding how to manage that scene and who you need to prioritize is very important. If it's a protest type situation, actually making contact with the person that's organizing the protest is extremely important. That has to be a top priority. But as you go to these large fight scenes, seeing who the individual aggressors are and being able to pick those 2 to maybe 3 people out, and understanding these are the people that we need to move to, that we need to get out of that scene, that we need to place under arrest, that is what is going to dissolve and diffuse and de-escalate this entire situation. If you try to arrest 50 to 60 people with a team of 5 or 6 officers, it's impossible. But you have 5 or 6 officers that safely move towards the main aggressors. A majority of those people are the followers. If you find out who the leaders of that disorderly group are and able to prioritize your movement towards them, it's going to be crucial to your success. And as the leader, with all of this chaos unfolding around you, people yelling, people putting a phone in your face, to be able to take that one step back and be able to move, you'll be able to quickly dissolve that situation. I've seen that many times. I'm sure you have as well, Colin.
Yeah, the protest scenarios is one great example. And sometimes you gotta ask yourself, hey, does this arrest need to be made right now? Do we have good photo or imagery of this person, maybe from body worn cameras? Is that really the priority right now? Human life and the safety of our officers in the community is always of utmost importance, and I think that having having a clear picture of what your priorities are or should be is very helpful. And this is, whether you're in business or the business of policing, whatever the case. One of the things that comes to mind for me right away when we look at this, I think back to some of the more challenging scenes that I dealt with as a patrol supervisor. Responding to a shooting, for example, where we have multiple victims, a spread out crime scene. There's a lot going on there. There's a lot of moving parts. There again, simplify it and be real with yourself about what the priorities are. Obviously, human life, right? So we got to get those people treated. We got to get buses into the scene and out of the scene. So the other thing that comes up is properly delegating, working as a team, like Jim said. So being able to grab your officers and say, hey, need you to work on getting a clear path in and out for the buses. You guys that are with the victims, you're tied to them. You're going to stay with the victims. Locating shell casings a priority right now? Not so much. Is it important? Yes, absolutely. Is that something we're going to have to do? For sure, but not right this minute. So instead of trying to do a dozen things at once, let's figure out what the priorities are here and start banging away, executing those one by one in order of precedence. And that, again, that can be applied on the battlefield, in the boardroom, wherever it is that you're facing challenges as a leader. You just got to be able to take a step back. And that's another critical component too. I think it might even be later in this chapter that comes up, is detach, right? If you're in the weeds, if you're in the thick of it, it's going to be really difficult for you to see the big picture. That was one of the challenging things for me early on as a newly promoted sergeant, was getting out of the mode that I was so used to of being that hands-on cop, and recognizing that wasn't my job anymore. And there are times when you're going to be a hands-on leader and maybe, lead from the front, lead by example, maybe in certain protest scenarios that might be necessary. But generally speaking, as a leader, and especially for our newly promoted leaders in law enforcement, you've got to detach. You've got to take a step back, get that big picture, have that bird's eye perspective so that you can properly gauge what it is you're dealing with, prioritize those things, and start executing and delegating.
If you're too focused and you're too down on the ground, if you're so focused on threading the needle and that your tunnel vision is all right here, you can't see anything that's happening around you. Yeah. And I mean, it even goes with stacking calls. I'm sure you have to deal with it all the time. And in my department, especially, we have a lot of issues with self-dispatching, where people are coming out of their sectors and everybody wants to respond to the call. That's, I don't know, maybe there was a stabbing. We already have the person in custody. The incident is over. Why are we still sending units to the scene that I didn't request or that are not actually needed for it? Maybe it was just a quick 1-2 arrest. I have the 2-3 officers there. I don't need an additional 3 officers. I need them to stay in their sectors so that they can respond to a call in their sector if they're needed up there. So understanding that their priority for that individual person is to remain available for other calls for service that haven't come out yet. Because now if we're going from Jersey City all the way up to Weehawken, it puts us into a bad position. So it completely encompasses your just removing yourself from that, only focusing on that immediate scene, to thinking what's happening right now and what could be happening in 1 hour to 2 hours from right now.
We see this a lot with specialty unit personnel. If they're involved in some kind of situation that we need them, let's just say you have a narcotics officer that's helping you with this situation, or you have a traffic officer that's helping you with a situation. They're so fixated on their specialty that sometimes they look past the priorities of the situation that they're involved in and focus back to their specialty area. Like, we have seen this quite often, where you have, you're in charge of a major operation and you have a traffic officer that stops a car in the middle of it. Well, why are you stopping a car? Well, but there was a traffic violation. No, there's a bigger priority here. You have a narcotics officer who comes across some narcotics and he tries to make an arrest for narcotics. Like, there's a bigger picture and plan, but they become so fixated on their own little niche that they're involved with in their profession, that they forget about the big picture when they're part of a bigger operation. So I do agree with that, with what you're saying.
It actually ties directly into the next point. A particularly effective means to help prioritize and execute under pressure is to stay at least a step or two ahead of real-time problems. Through careful contingency planning, a leader can anticipate likely challenges that could arise during execution and map out an effective response to those challenges before they happen. And exactly what you said, Colin, if you're too down in the weeds and you're not thinking about the bigger picture, then you're never going to see that. And I had the same problem, especially when I first got promoted to sergeant. It's like you still wanted to be one of the guys. You wanted the guys to think that you were still like one of the cops with them. You're still out there making arrests. You're still out there using force when appropriate. You're not afraid to get your hands dirty. And though it might help you establish that bond, it's not helping them because they need a leader. And your position and your responsibility is to be the leader. And they don't need another police officer. If they need another police officer, we'll bring another police officer. They need a sergeant. They need a lieutenant. They need that person with the forethought. They need that person to do the communication up the chain of command when appropriate. That's your job. That's how you have to look at your job.
I think the actual practice of this particular principle is going to vary to a degree from one agency to another, depending on your organization and your assets and things like that. But understanding it and how to apply it is the key. And so, the way that I make it work might not be the same way that you make it work, as long as we understand the principle and how to apply it. With that being said, for me, going back to that shooting scene example, right now, that incident might take up the bulk of the officers that I have available at my disposal. Let's say I'm a precinct sergeant, and most of the officers assigned to that tour, to that precinct, are now tied up on that job. I'm not going to wait until another priority call comes in to figure out how I'm going to break people free and get that job handled, right? I'm going to anticipate that issue. I recognize that, hey, all my people are tied up on this job right now. If something else comes in, we got a problem. And then I start making phone calls, or I ask dispatch, hey, check the stack and let me know how we're looking in the other precincts. Which precinct right now has the least amount of calls being handled at the moment? I'm going to reach out to the sergeant over there. Hey, can you spare a body right now? Have somebody come up to my area and just be available in case they're needed. They can maybe help us out at the crime scene over here, but they're going to be available when that next call comes in that we have to get somebody to quickly, right? We're anticipating those problems ahead of time, putting measures in place to be sure that we're positioned to deal with those rather than, getting stumped by it when it comes in because we failed to anticipate.
And that goes really into those larger scenes as well. I've had a couple of incidents, both as lieutenant or sergeant, where I'm looking at an incident and I'm seeing that this is going to be multi-operational periods. We need to start thinking about relief. We need to bring people in to get these guys that have been on this call for the last 4 hours out of here. They haven't had a meal. They haven't had a chance to go to the bathroom. Like, human beings need to go to sleep. We have labor rules too. We're not supposed to work them past 16 hours. We need to give them 8 hours in between. If I'm overworking these guys, who's going to be here tomorrow morning? Everyone's going to be out sick. So having that forethought as well to look into the relief, and just like you said, pulling from other sectors, possibly bringing people in early, knowing your department regulations and rules on how to order people in that are on their day off when appropriate. For emergency situations, that's all crucial, and that's part of being a leader in those moments, making sure that those notifications are made to get those balls rolling now rather than waiting another 2 to 3 hours, because that delay could be very costly to you.
Yeah, here's one too that I think is an example of bridging the gap between being a manager and being a leader, right? Because some of what we're talking about right now is I think more management, right? How do we manage these large scale incidents or scenes or jobs or whatever? Not to get too dark, but it's the reality of our profession. We had a job where some officers responded to what ended up being a fatal fire involving some young children. I believe it was a 6-month-old and a 6-year-old, and terribly tragic incident. But here again, putting multiple principles together, right? Taking care of your people on top of anticipating problems, prioritizing things. Those officers that handled that job and saw the terrible things that stemmed from that job, we would absolutely be doing them a disservice if we put them back out on the road to go handle the next call. And what if the next call involves an abused child or some domestic type incident, right? we're setting them up for failure. Would it really be their fault, or would it be the leader's fault if they end up in a bad use of force because of the levels of emotion and stress that they're grappling with when they really should have been taken out of service? Right. And so anticipating those types of things and being the servant leader, constantly paying attention to how you can take care of your people, recognizing those types of needs and prioritizing your people over the call stack, and doing the right thing by them is it's a big deal. And I think that, like I said, it bridges that gap between being a manager and being a true leader.
I'm very lucky in my department that we were ahead of the curve before this use of force policy came in, but that duty to intervene, and we talk about just having that relief in there, and it couldn't be for something as tragic as that to a use of force incident where a person is so emotionally vested in this interaction between him and the arrestee that there's now back and forth that could potentially lead to more force. Our duty as leaders, as supervisors, as even coworkers, officer to officer, is to remove that person from that situation. Don't allow there to be a potential, because that person is trying to bait him in. He wants to be assaulted. He wants to get into a fight with the officer. Removing him from that and having the wherewithal and the being removed far enough from the actual interaction to make sure that we see that. I mean, there's just so much we owe to the people that we work with. And that's exactly what you said. It's what being a leader is all about, having that servant mindset and being able to actually see these problems by being far enough back. And you can't do that when you're too far in the weeds.
Oh, and that falls, what you're talking about falls right into our theory, or the practice that we created called the tactical control transfer, with a proactive intervention with use of force. And if anybody hasn't heard of this, please come to our use of force courses, because we talk about it all the time. We have a proactive duty to intervene method where we recognize the signs of emotional activity. Once emotion plays in, we're not really relying on our training and experience to handle the incident. We're reacting based on our emotions. So if we can proactively identify that, we can remove that party proactively from that situation so that we protect our brother and sisters from sometimes themselves.
Yeah.
I think we'll move on to the next point here. When confronted with the enormity of operational plans and the intricate micro terrain within those plans, it becomes easy to get lost in the details. To become sidetracked or lose focus on the bigger effort, it is crucial, particularly for the leaders at the top of the organization, to pull themselves off the firing line, step back, and maintain the strategic picture. This is essential to help correctly prioritize for the team. Perspective. Jim, please tell me about your experiences with Hurricane Sandy. Yeah, I was just watching that video with Steve of the scene with you and him with was it United Rentals? The video that they put together. How difficult was it for you guys to prioritize and execute a plan to overcome what was the most catastrophic storm in the Northeast?
So, we always have incident action plans. You have all hazard emergency planning in place, but you never really expect it to be to that grand scale all at once. So, having good leaders in place in the moment and being ready for it mentally and emotionally to handle those, it was excellent, because we all work together as a team. And it goes back to a couple minutes ago what you were saying. In the moment, I had we decentralized command, and we had I was going to be in charge of the mainland and making sure calls were handled in the mainland, and others were going to be in charge of the barrier island and the things that needed to be done there. So first thing that my leaders had said to us is, they said, what do you need? Because we were still operating under normal schedules. We're still operating under normal things, and this is not the normal anymore. So, the chief at the time had said to me, and Steve was actually, he was in charge, and he said, what do you need? And I said, well, I need 12-hour schedules. I need, everybody recalled. I need this, I need that. And they're like, okay, get it done. So having that leadership available to ask me what I need, not dictating what I'm going to have, that was key. And then the other aspect was them allowing me to ask and then just granting me that permission to run with it in that moment. And then having a team of, this is where all the egos went away. Anybody who had an ego, they didn't have it. We all worked together. I went back, I'm like, this is what I need done. Everybody just did their roles and responsibilities, and everybody saw the bigger picture in this moment because it was a catastrophic event. So everybody did work together to achieve that mission. So in
How
the
many
moment,
how many people were left without a home during that?
oh God, there was I can't even remember. It was just catastrophic. We lost, tens of thousands of homes.
How difficult was it to mobilize shelters for the people that were left homeless?
I'll tell you, we had a great relationship because we actually had a practice run the year before with another hurricane that never really hit. So we had a practice run with that, and it allowed for our Office of Emergency Management was outstanding with them working with our stakeholders to get our shelters up and running for anyone that needed them. And I have to, our citizens of our community stepped up. We had citizens taking in people, neighbors, people with generators, allowed neighbors to come over. It was just an outstanding community effort all around.
Yeah, it just shows the level of trust that was built prior to the actual incident, and having a practice run, as you say, with a previous hurricane, but also having those relationships in place. And Steve actually told the story to me about JCP&L. The entire state was out of service. Good luck getting through to somebody at JCP&L calling their 800 number during Hurricane Sandy. But because you have the relationship with the regional manager, you have his cell phone, you have that, hey, it's Joey, how are you? This is what I need, because we have life-saving efforts that need to happen. Like having that personal relationship in place and knowing that these are our stakeholders, knowing if I need school buses to transport people, I have my contact at the Board of Ed. I have my contact at transit to get New Jersey Transit bus. We get called out all the time for temporary shelters to use buses with our OEM. So those relationships are so crucial. And I mean, exactly how you described it, with saying that, making sure that, it came together because of that trust and because of that leadership. Like, you don't want to be establishing that trust and leadership in the moment that you need it. It happens well before that day.
Yeah, let me give you an example of how you build that trust, because you talked about JCP&L and having that regional manager on the line immediately. So in the beginning of every year, we used to send our midnight guys. I want you hitting every street. Every street, I want you to look for streetlights. Any street light out, you report it. We're going to report it to JCP&L, our electric company. Now, many people are like, well, why? Why do we have to do streetlight patrol? Well, number one, streetlight, taxpayers pay for every streetlight, whether it's on or off. Now, crime prevention through environmental design, lights help reduce crime. So the more lights you have, the better it is for your citizens, right? It creates an aspect of a feeling of safety and security. So you can reduce the fear of crime in your community by having all of those lights on. There's so many benefits to it. Now, that's one of the things we do with that. We want to make sure our community is safer, and we do it through the lights. So JCP&L, they send a crew overnight to fix the lights. They're not going to send somebody to fix the street light when they don't know if it's on or off. So they'll send a crew out overnight, and they request us to send an officer with them just to make sure nobody rear ends them, nobody backs into them. And we do. And the officers were always like, well, why isn't this an overtime thing? Why isn't this a side job gig? It's because they're helping us in our community, and we actually built a great relationship with them during this project. And that came to fruition when Hurricane Sandy hit. Because when Hurricane Sandy hit, we have done so much for them that the minute we picked up the phone, they just came right down when we needed them the most. So we built that external stakeholder relationship, and it was strong. Now, not everybody in the organization understands why we do what we do, but that is exactly why we did what we did.
That's a great example.
Yeah,
You want to run through that bullet list, Colin?
sure.
All right. To implement, prioritize, and execute in any team or organization, a leader must evaluate the highest priority problem, lay out in simple, clear, and concise terms the highest priority effort of your team, develop and determine a solution, seek input from key leaders and from the team where possible, direct the execution of that solution, focusing all efforts and resources towards this priority task. Move on to the next highest priority problem. Repeat. When priorities shift within the team, pass situational awareness both up and down the chain. Don't let the focus on one priority cause target fixation. Maintain the ability to see other problems developing and rapidly shift as needed.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. So here again, we have an example of, okay, the concept, the principle is fairly simple. Application can sometimes be a little more complicated, but none of the ideas here are really tough. I think if you familiarize yourself with this list, it's a great strategy. And everything there is important, but I think one of the things that we sometimes fail at is recognizing when priorities shift. So often we are locked in to a certain way of doing things, whether it be a policy or an order that was given, whatever the case. And as the situation evolves and changes, maybe leadership is not made aware of those changes. So they're losing perspective, they're losing situational awareness, where they might have shifted fire, they might have changed the plan had they been made aware. Because they're not aware, you have people continuing with the same plan and failing to adjust to changing priorities, which can be a real problem. There's countless examples of this. I'm sure we could all come up with a bunch of stories, but again, I think as a leader, if you familiarize yourself with this list and practice it, it can be a great tool. And don't forget that you have to constantly reevaluate, maintain your situational awareness at all times, and shift focus when needed.
Regardless of your wealth, regardless of your social economic class, the one thing we all have in common is that we have the same amount of time in a day. Nobody gets more than 24 hours. And I mean, unless maybe you're using illicit narcotics, you need to sleep. So
Jim seems to have about 34 hours a day. There's something going on there, but
well, the one thing that Jim does well, since my experience working with him, is he definitely delegates well and pushes projects to the appropriate person. And that goes directly into the next concept, decentralized command. But I myself have failed. I'm sure all of us have at some point. But prior to being a police officer, I attempted to run 2 separate businesses. I attempted to take on a larger sales staff than I could actually handle at one time. And I spread myself so thin and didn't prioritize that I failed in the sense that I had to reset and reprioritize. And once I was able to say this secondary business has become more burdensome than profitable, eliminating that business, focusing on the business that was growing the fastest, and then focusing on the individual areas where I was able to maximize sales and knowing which target audience I wanted to go after at one time. If I was trying to go after 10 different audiences at once, I was losing focus and trying to move in too many directions. Only one person, I have only so many hours in a day, especially when you're coupling that with bringing on new salespeople and bringing on the challenges of training a new person and making sure that they understand the business to the same level I do. When you move too fast and you try to spread yourself too thin, you're going to fail. And that translates into police work. It translates into the military. Jocko gives a lot of good examples, but I myself went through that, and I wish that I had that reality check and an ego check earlier, because I thought I was a superhero at that point in my life. But I mean, it's great too, because again, you see how everything comes full circle in this book. We're talking about the next chapter. We're talking about the previous chapters, but the more that you're able to understand and prioritize, the easier it's going to be for you. And it's crucial and important in every business, every level of government, every police department. And it's a very true concept.
Yeah, what you're talking about too, with spreading yourself too thin and focusing on the one thing, that is the hedgehog concept. If you ever read Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, so that falls right into another leadership book. All these leadership books, all these leadership concepts, they all intertwine. They're all, it's what we know. We just have to be constantly reminded. We are students of leaders, students of leadership. The study of leadership. We need to continually remind ourselves of this. I was just out out west teaching a class, and the class was for mid-level leaders, and I have all first line supervisors, and I'm like, okay, where are the mid-level leaders that are supposed to be here? And they're like, oh, they don't come to these classes. I'm like, why? It's like, oh, they don't. They went to a class once. Yeah, this is why we're failing as leaders in law enforcement. We have to continue. We send traffic officers to traffic schools. We send narcotics officers to narcotic schools. When you become a leader, you have to continually go to schools. I don't care if it's every few months. I don't care if it's at least every 2 years. Go to something, because we are students of leadership. Our craft now is leading others. And we have to be constantly reminded of these leadership philosophies and theories. So everything you're talking about with understanding what you're supposed to be doing in your niche, in your area, Joe, you're right. That niche for us is leadership, and they have to be keep reminding of it.
One thing I do really like, though, Jim, from that story, is that you had a room full of frontline supervisors in a mid-level leadership course. That that to me is great. I mean, one of the things that I've seen is nobody getting sent for that leadership training, nobody getting prepared for that job until after they're already in it. You should be going to that frontline supervisor training when you're taking the test, when you're anticipating, hey, I'm going to perform well, I'm going to get promoted, I need to start preparing for that now. You should be preparing for mid-level management when you're a frontline supervisor, in anticipation and developing yourself. And I don't know about you guys, but in my agency, it is not at all uncommon to come in on a tour as a sergeant and be told, hey, you're the acting lieutenant tonight. You're going to be on the desk as a lieutenant. That's not the time to start figuring out what a lieutenant does.
I agree.
You should be prepared for that role well in advance, not just when they actually put the bars on you. So
yeah, we even talk about that in our classes, like our first line supervisor class. If you have people, even if it's possibly one shift a month, that are going to serve as from an officer, maybe they're the senior officer on the shift and the sergeant takes off, they're the sergeant for the night. They better have gone to a class, because they need to know all the concepts, because they're on the hook liability wise as a supervisor that shift.
yeah.
And if something goes wrong, they're on the hook for it, and so is the agency, because they failed to train. So I constantly say that, always train up.
It's one of the things the Marine Corps is really big on, and why in so many different theaters of combat they've been successful. This thing has been pointed out, and that's that every single private PFC Lance Corporal is preparing all the time, every day, to be a team leader. Every team leader is constantly preparing to be a squad leader to be a platoon commander, and so on up the chain. Everybody is training those beneath them to take their place and working to prepare to take the place of the person above them at all times.
That last class that Phil and I were out in New Mexico for, 5 or 6 of the students were police officers. One didn't even take the sergeant yet, but I guess the department recognized he will be a future leader of that agency. So
That's great.
it's great. It's great to see that.
And
But
just as a side note, Joey, I just want to update you. He was passed the test. He just got promoted.
I know Brandon got promoted. He'll text me. I text Brendan. That's awesome. But going back to what you said, that all of these leadership books intertwine and intermingle, I think that should be more than enough evidence to show that we are not smart enough to go against the grain of these books. If every book is telling you to do the same thing in a different way, whether it's military, business, police, if you think that you could do better, if you think you could do this brand new concept, there's hundreds of years of research out there. So to think that would be very egotistical and a failure on your part. So if you see that you're doing something that's against some of these principles, it might be worth taking a step back and possibly trying one of these principles to see if it works out better for you.
General Mattis, who's probably one of the greatest leaders of our time, really big on that. He said, stealing from somebody else, I can't recall at the moment who the quote was from, but there's nothing new under the sun. And he traveled, he was known for traveling with a personal library. And he would always say, as a leader, if you are reading, if you are studying, if you are learning, you will not encounter a problem that somebody else has not already encountered and written about. So something else that, that he was big on, and we see this, in many different organizations. Not every reader is a leader, but every leader should be a reader. You gotta be checking out these books. Like you were saying before, we're students of leadership. We have to study that craft and be professionals at it, and work on that professional development all the time.
And even in that case law class we were doing on Monday, Colin, telling them, you're probably never going to come across the same exact stop, maybe not even the same exact fact pattern from one individual case. But as you study case law and as you understand arrest, search, and seizure, the more that you culminate, a lot of the fact patterns come together to give you what would be your reasonable articulable suspicion. And the more that you know all of these cases and you're looking at a case unfold directly in front of you, the more that you're going to recognize the individual tells of deception, the individual articulable facts that need to go into your report, that now, because you're well trained, because you're well read, you're able to write this very cohesive report. You know at what moment you had the probable cause to do a search or to make an arrest, etc. And that's all reflected in your report. That stops bad case law from happening. And that exactly is the same concept with the leadership. The more that you recognize these patterns and the more that you're able to catch yourself falling into one of the mistakes that somebody else has already made, the earlier you'll be able to correct it, because none of us are perfect. And the more that we recognize that, the better that we will be for ourselves, for our subordinates, and for our agency, even the citizens as a whole, because it'll help push your organization in the right direction.
For sure.
All right, with that, why don't we bring this episode to an end? Once again, I want to thank Joey and Colin for jumping in and taking on this task of reviewing these leadership concepts. It is something that we all feel is important. I mean, we teach these concepts throughout the United States in all of our leadership and command series classes, and they are important. We are students of leadership. We are students of leadership. That is our craft now, as once you hit that first line supervisor and you move up in the chain of command, and we have to stay focused on our primary mission as leaders, taking care of our people. If we take care of our people, the organization will just take care of itself. So with that, I just want to bring it to a close. I want to thank you all for listening, and stay safe out there.
Stay safe.
Take care. Stay safe.
This podcast is brought to you by the J. Harris Academy of Police Training. J. Harris Academy of Police Training is based in New Jersey and provides law enforcement training services nationwide for promotional examinations, use of force, supervisory development, and other key areas within law enforcement. This podcast is utilized to discuss key topics occurring within the profession. The opinions and information provided is for entertainment purposes only. In an effort to provide this, we often purposely discuss opposite views and opinions to spark conversation and develop discussion points. The contents of the show and show notes are all copyrighted. All blog posts, podcasts, and show notes that are distributed to the public for free can be redistributed via hard copy or electronic copy for free only if the J. Harris Academy of Police Training is included as the acknowledged author within the actual media that is redistributed. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast or blog. Under no circumstances shall the J. Harris Academy of Police Training, any guests, contributors to the podcast or blog, or any employees, associates, or affiliates of the company be responsible for damages arising from the use of the information provided.